morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say, to everyone who's attending today's Wednesday webinar. I'm Scott Clayson, the Marketing Director at TimeSolv, and once again, I will be your host for this monthly TimeSolv webinar. So just to kind of recap the purpose of these webinars, we send out a tip of the week, as most of you should know, generally on Monday morning. Sometimes it happens on Tuesdays, like yesterday. To let our customers know the different things about TimeSolv that they may have never learned when they started using the system, or perhaps they saw it in training and then never had to use it for a while. Various features that you can use at TimeSolv as you continue to bill your time, send invoices, collect payments, and all that good stuff that TimeSolv does. There's a lot of horsepower under the hood here, and we want to make sure that you're getting maximum capacity for it. I'm going to apologize ahead of time if you hear any bangs or noises during this webinar. I'm conducting it today from my home office because my furnace finally gave out after what's been an extraordinarily long Minnesota winter here as I'm in Minneapolis, and so they are replacing not only my furnace but also my air conditioning unit right now. So I'm home during that endeavor, and you might hear some banging in the background. So my apologies. Okay, so this is again going to be the April Wednesday webinar. We're going to make sure that everyone gets out of here in about, I think today's will probably be less than 45 minutes even. I do have everyone on mute during the webinar as per usual, and I will open up a Q&A at the end of the session to cover any questions you might have. I do ask just to refrain from typing in those questions until we do get done, because in the past some of you might have questions that I eventually answer 1 or 2 or 3 minutes later as I'm going through some of these features and these tips. And to refresh everyone's memory who's been on these webinars before, at the top of your screen as you're looking at the web browser of join.me here, there is a little kind of thought icon, cartoon icon bubble. If you click on that, that's the chat area to put in any questions when the time comes. So I think that should just about cover most of the housekeeping items. So let's go ahead and jump into what we're going to cover today. We only have 3 topics today. Generally we have 4 to 5, but we did have the Wednesday webinar in March was a little bit later in the month, so we haven't had as many tips of the weeks to roll through here. Actually, there's only been 2 since our last one on March 21st. We missed a week last week with a tip of the week. But here's what we're going to cover today. We'll talk first about how to generate retainer invoices, and this is a subject that comes up a lot. And I should back this up by saying the tip of the week that we send out and the topics for these webinars are generated basically from me talking to our support staff and asking the simple question like, hey, what are you hearing a lot of questions about? When people are emailing or sending in or calling in support, what are they mainly asking about? And in this case, it was about retainer invoices. Oh, I apologize. I hear some drilling here outside of my house. So again, apologies. So we'll talk about retainer invoices. The other one that has come up recently is how to create billable, non-billable, and no charge entries, time entries, and expense entries if you need to. And then kind of a bonus tip of the week is about making rate changes. And this is I think probably a little known feature about TimeSolv that really makes it fast and easy if you need to blanket or in a mass way update rates for time entries that already exist. So we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. So first, let's talk about retainer invoices. Where you go to generate them, what you can include on the retainer invoice, and then how to go ahead and send those. So let's jump right into TimeSolv. And you should now all be seeing my TimeSolv demo account here as I log in. I'm going to actually blow this up just a little bit to make it a little easier for everyone to see. Maybe right about there. So oftentimes we're asked, how do I just generate an invoice that I need to send to a client for updating a retainer fee. And this, even if the matter isn't active, you're maybe not working on an active matter, so you don't have any time entries, or you're not going to be sending an invoice for work done. Because this is an important note that if you are sending a regular updated invoice to a client that you have on a retainer, you can set that up ahead of time so that if the retainer itself falls below a certain threshold that you can designate, that there'll be an auto replenishment placed on an invoice if you do send an invoice to a client with documenting time entries and expense entries. And then you can also set it to auto pay those invoices from the retainer or trust account. But if that's not the case, where you might just have a retainer replenishment that you need to do and you don't have any time entries or any other information that you need to send them, you want to generate just a retainer invoice. So where you want to head to is just under the Invoices main section here, down to Retainers. And you'll see a list of previous retainer invoices you may have generated. You can also find them doing a date search. If you can search by client and matter if you have a whole bunch of them. You can also eventually export all of those to Excel if need be. So let's talk about how you would generate a new retainer invoice. So we're going to click right up here in the upper right hand corner, this simple plus icon where it says new retainer invoice. Pretty intuitive there. And you're going to notice that we have a window that pops up, and you want to give your invoice a title. I should step back. These retainer invoices are fairly simple in that they're not going to draw from your flexible billing templates that you use when sending out regular invoices. This is going to be just a pretty generic looking document, as you'll see. So the title is basically what's going to be at the very top centered area of the invoice itself. So you can call it whatever you'd like to call it. Then you want to select obviously the client and matter you're going to be sending this to, the date, any retainer number that you might have as in your record keeping, what the amount's going to be, any message you want to send along. Do you want to include the from address, which will be the default address that you have for the account? And then how do you want to output it? Generally PDF is how most people want to do it. You could output it into Word and do some further formatting if you'd like. You'll notice here we don't have an option right now to email that invoice, but when I select a client and matter, you will have that option, and I'll explain that in just a second. So let's go ahead and just select any client and matter, and I'm going to say Best Buy, and it's going to be, for this matter, estate plan. You'll notice as soon as I click this client and matter, I did come up with a new row here that says send by email, and the box is checked. If you have a contact for your client or matter with an email address designated, that row will then pop up, and if with that box being checked, it will send the invoice automatically via email. And here's an important caveat to that. You will not be able to actually preview the invoice before it's sent. Draft invoices, obviously it's real easy to download or look at a preview before you ever send it out, whether it's by email or printer or whatever it might be. It's a little different here with the retainer invoices in that if you check that box right there and download it, go ahead and create it, it's going to automatically send that invoice or that retainer invoice via email. So let's go ahead and fill this out and say it's retainer number 1005. The amount is $2,000. The text is April's retainer replenishment. If I could spell replenishment. Okay. Include the from address. Yes, we're going to output it via PDF. So let's go ahead and create it. And it says, right, as you can see, the invoice was emailed successfully. Okay. Now, we also then, we don't really have the option here of seeing the invoice. It was out, we had it output to PDF, but because we had that box checked email, that was my mistake. I should have just done it as unchecked that box. You won't actually see the invoice. Let's do another one. So that was a bad example on my part. I'm too distracted by the drilling happening outside my house right now as they're making a new vent for my furnace. So we'll do uncheck this box here. Call it 106. This is going to be for $2,500. April retainer. We're going to output it as a PDF. And now it's downloading there. I'm going to open it. As you can see, it's real simple, just pretty straightforward document. It has the title up here that we called it retainer invoice, so you can call that whatever you need to call it. The date that we did it, the retainer number, that is something that you just internally decide upon. We have the from address. This is the name of my firm here, and I'm invoicing it to this is the name of the client. This is my contact with their address. Here are the notes, and then here's the amount. So it's real simple stuff here in creating these, and so that's it. You know, you can then obviously, like I said, you can export these to Excel so you can see a running record of them, and it's fairly straightforward. And then we can get into some other Wednesday webinars about how, and we've done these in the past, about how to do auto replenishment of a trust or retainer account that would be placed on a regular invoice, how to pay your invoices, mark them automatically as paid as soon as you send them against a trust account. So there's lots of different things you can do with our trust accounting. This is really one of the more simpler things to do with your retainer or trust accounts. And so if you do need or want further help on working with your trust accounts, please make sure you set up a support session or contact your account manager that you have, and they'll be happy to show you how it gets done. Okay, so let's go back to our next tip here. And we're going to be taking a look at a question that's asked often, and that is creating billable, non-billable, or no charge entries. I'm going to show you how to enable the permissions, because the ability to mark a time or expense entry as billable, non-billable, or no charge does not come for each timekeeper by default. You do have to go into each timekeeper that you have in TimeSolv and give them the ability to mark a time or expense entry as billable, non-billable, or no charge. And then, Chris, we'll talk about a little bit about what's the difference between a non-billable entry and a no charge, and then I'll talk a little bit about some best practices. Okay, so you'll notice when on my time entry screen, for me as Scott Laidlaw here, that's the dummy administrator or lead of this, my demo firm, I do have in the time entry screen a billable type option here when I make a time entry. In fact, it's required here. Same thing under my expense entries. Okay, you'll see, and by default it'll always come up as being that this is billable, and then I have the option of billable, non-billable, or no charge. Now, the question does come up frequently, what is the difference between non-billable and no charge? A no charge time entry will appear on an invoice that you send the client, and it'll say no charge. This is times when you want to show a client the work that you may have done, but designate that you're not charging for that work. Sometimes that's an important consideration. A non-billable time entry is just that. It is, again, you're not charging the client for the work, but you want to document that there was some work done. This is for internal purposes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, why you'd want to do that in just a few minutes. So when you come into your TimeSolv account, however, even if you are marked as an admin, like under the I'm going a little too quick here. So under account and professionals, you see a list of all of the people who have TimeSolv accounts here. And you'll notice that when I click on myself as a timekeeper, and I come over here to the permissions tab, I'm an administrator here, but if you're an administrator for your account, you're going to notice that there's two boxes that are unchecked right now, and that's under time entries here, update billable type and update expense billable type. By default, these are unchecked, and when you do that and save those, and if I go back to my time entries, you'll see I don't have the option for entering a billable type. This is what most of you probably see right now in your TimeSolv account, because that's what it is by default. And to set that for anybody, whether you're an administrator or not, you have to, like I said, touch every single professional, go to their profile, click on their name, click on the permissions tab, and come down here and say, yes, they can update billable type for time entries and expense entries. Okay, and then we're going to hit save. And then it'll appear again here. You can see billable type right here. Okay. I think it's important, and this is the best practices that we often coach people who talk to us at TimeSolv. The non-billable time entry should be used by everyone in your firm for everything they do. This is a great way for partners and those that are overseeing, the amount of billable time that is being put in by your attorneys. What are they doing with their time if it's not billable time? So, for example, this might sound crazy, but if they are, doing a work for, you need to enter obviously a client and a matter, and maybe a lot of firms will set up, a client, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes here, which obviously you can't see. If you have a client that you set up, that's like the name of your own firm. In this case, it's Laidlaw and Associates, my firm, and I have a matter set up called non-billable time, whatever it might be. Have them do a time entry against that if they're doing anything that's not billable. And this is where you can find, it came out a couple of years ago. This was based on Clio's small business, small law firm trends that, for a lot of solo attorneys, they're only billing about 30% of their time. It's like, well, what are they doing with the rest of that time? Let's track it. And then you can have a good sense of, maybe there are attorneys who are at $300 an hour and they are spending time doing things that somebody who bills $150 an hour could be doing, and it's not being billed to anybody. Well, have the person with a cheaper rate do it, and make sure that the people who are most expensive at your firm are spending the majority of their time on billable work. Even if they go to lunch for an hour and a half, track that time. Put it against that client called, Laidlaw and Associates or whatever the name of the firm is, and the matter is non-billable. And put in that, they spent, 1.25 hours non-billable time, at lunch. And then you can run a report at the end of the month against, that client and matter of how much time was there that was spent doing things non-billable. If they have, you have this easy to see list here of the amount of hours, time entry hours here. It's like, okay, well, you have, 6 hours. Well, how much of that was billable time versus non-billable time? Okay, those are the sort of things that as a firm, you can find the leaks in the ship and where you're leaking out money by having all of your timekeepers enter time for even their non-billable, work, whatever it might be. Okay. So that's my little get on the soapbox spiel about you should be tracking both billable and non-billable time. You really should. Okay, so hopefully that was fairly clear to everybody. So let's move on to our last tip for the month. And that is making rate changes. And like I said at the beginning, I think this is a very hidden gem within TimeSolv's features. I don't think many people even realize that if they need to change the rates on time entries, they don't have to go back to every time entry by hand and change it, and that you can do a mass update. And I'll show you how that's done. I'll explain why you have to update those time entries. And I'll make sure it's important to note that if any time entries have been placed on even draft invoices, you will not be able to update those time entries. So let's take a look at how that works. So the obvious thing you would think of like, oh, okay, starting in April, me as Scott Laidlaw here at my dummy name of my law firm, I've changed my rates. My fiscal year starts in April and whatever. I've changed my rates from my normal rate to I've upped it by $15. But I've already made a whole bunch of time entries, as you can see, that first week in April. And oh, I don't want to go back. I mean, what a pain in the butt it is. You could go back and change these, one at a time, every single time entry, and make an update on the rate. But that takes a lot of time. The obvious what people think they could do or should do is go under your account to your professional, and I'm gonna click on my own name, change my rate. It's not 250 anymore. I've now upped my rates to 265. Yay! All right, that should then go back to my time entries, and wait, they're all still at 250. Well, that's because TimeSolv doesn't assume just because you change the timekeeper default, it does not assume that any previous time entries you've made should be at that new rate. That's not up for us to decide as the software. That's for you to decide which time entries in the past should be updated. So how do you go about updating this week-long time entries if I want to, if I don't want to do them one by one, which is a bit of a pain? So we've changed the timekeeper default from $250 to $265 an hour already. To update the existing time entries that are not on a draft invoice or a sent invoice, I mean, that kind of goes without saying. If you've already sent an invoice, obviously those time entries are not going to be updated. What you need to do is go under Time to Settings. You want to click on this tab called Rate Changes right here. And from here, you can put in, I want to do it for any matter that I've worked on in April so far. So you can search in a couple of different ways for these time entries by a specific matter, if you'd like, or by the date. So let's do the date range. We know from April 2nd to today, that's what I'm looking for. And it's going to show me all of my time entries that I've put in during this time period. And then it's going to show me I have my old rate here, which was $250. And here's my new rate that I now have as my default. Great, easy. And you have an option like include time entries where the rate had been overwritten. And what that means is if you come in here to a time entry that you went to make in, whatever it might be, let's say it's against, this matter here, and I overrode my rate right here manually, and I had it at 275 or whatever, you would have the ability to then change that as well. Okay, so we're going to go back to rate changes. Okay, I'm going to search and find all of them. Again, I have my old rate, my new rate. Do I want to update them all? I just simply check this box here and it'll select all of them. Maybe I really only want to do the ones from the first 2 days, whatever it might be. You can hand select the ones that you want to update. In this case, I'm going to select them all. As soon as you notice this, as soon as I check any one of these boxes, you see that a new button appears that says Update Rates in Selected Time Entries. So you haven't done anything yet. You just need to push that button. If we go back to the time entries and we take a look at them, they're all now at 265. I updated them all at once. Easy to do. You could do it for every single matter if you'd like for that time period. Let's look at the other case scenario that a lot of people will think is a way to change the rates. And that is I have a particular matter rate that I'm charging just specifically for one client and one matter. And in this case, let's say it's this Kaplan and Friends and this NetDocs matter that I have. And I have, let's set the rate by the matter rate. I'm like, okay, perfect. Okay, and so let's edit the rates. Well, first of all, before we do that, let me go back here a little bit. I'm going to show you that, let's search for some time entries. Oh, excuse me, I went to the time entry screen. I'm going to show you that I have already a bunch of time entries for Kaplan. Let's search for them. Here they are. They were all made by me. They were all at $2.50 an hour. But maybe we've decided after doing a bunch of work, you've talked to them, they're having financial issues, you've decided I'm going to knock out, the rate down to, and for this work and all the work going forward, I'm going to, instead of doing 250 an hour, I'm going to charge them 225 or 200. So you have a couple of options. You can update those time entries, just like I showed you before, but that rate was 265. That's your timekeeper default. You don't want to do it that way. Let's do it as a specific matter rate. So we'll go in to the NetDocs matter. We have all these existing time entries, and instead of doing timekeeper default, we're going to give it a new matter rate. So we're going to edit the rates here. And we're going to say, you know what? I'm not doing 265 anymore. Those were at 250, obviously, as you saw. I'm going to do it instead at $200 an hour. That's going to be the matter rate now for my NetDocs matter. Great. So let's go back to the time entries, do a search. We've got Kaplan, search. Oh, they're still at 250. How come? Well, because we have to update, same things we did before. We have to update the existing time entries. We're not going to automatically assume that just because you have a matter you've been working on at the default rate for, I don't know, since February, and you decide now today in April to change that to a matter rate, and my matter rate is going to be at 200. We don't assume that all the past time entries should be updated to that. That, again, is not up to us to decide that, and that may not be the case, that you need to update those old time entries. But if you do, this is the way you have to do it in this fashion here, where you come in here, back under time, to settings, to rate changes, and this time for the client matter, I'm just going to start typing Kaplan and Friends, and there it is right there. And I'm going to hit search, and here's all those time entries. Now those other ones didn't show up. Those other ones that I had, and that was some back in February, right? Why is that? How come I'm only seeing these ones that go back to March? Let's do that search again, and you'll see why if we look closely. See, these time entries from February have already been billed. They've already been sent out on an invoice. We can't update those. If for whatever reason, maybe they haven't paid that February invoice yet, and you wanted to update those entries as well, you'd have to go back to the sent invoice, void it back to draft mode, and then void the draft. So it's two steps. You go from sent invoice, you void it back to draft, and then you delete the draft altogether. That would free up, if you will, these time entries, and then you could redo that February invoice if you needed. Okay? So what we're going to end up doing if we want to update these specific rates here that have not been billed, we'll do it just like we did before. We're going to go to Time, Settings. We go to our rate changes here. We're going to click on Kaplan and Friends. And again, it's finding only the unbilled time entries. We have our old rate, we have our new rate. We select them all, we update the rates. Now you've just done all those rates in a matter of seconds versus going manually to all those old time entries and having to do them one by one by one by one. We found this has really been a great thing for firms that do litigation work where they might have or class action suits where they might have matters open for years. There's one firm we have in the Washington, D.C. area where they'll have matters that have been going on for 4 or 5 years, but when the case is finally closed and they can bill it out, they are allowed to update the matters, the time entries to whatever the existing matter rate is today. Well, their rates obviously are different today than they were 5 years ago. This is a way where they can update those time entries en masse, which is a great thing. And you can even do it for inactive timekeepers as well. Okay, so that's the kind of the information, the skinny on how to update entries that have already been created if you have changed your matter rate. And that goes in any way, whether it's a global rate that you've applied to a matter and you've changed the global rate. Again, always keep it in mind. You can change the rates anywhere you want. Timekeeper default rate, a global rate you might have, a matter rate you might have. It doesn't really matter. But when you make that change, it's only going to affect time and expense entries from that moment forward. It is not going to go back in time and retroactively update those entries. We, again, are not going to assume that's what you want to do. But this is the way you go and update those previous time entries if you have to for whatever reason, and do it in a very fast manner. You don't have to do it one by one by one by one for hundreds of entries if that's the case. Okay? And again, if you need any help on any of these things that you saw today, always email us at support@timesolv.com and ask your question, or in the email you could also set up perhaps a time to walk through things, or you can also always call us at 1-800-715-1284, and we'll be happy to walk you through the details on any questions or issues you might be having with TimeSolv. So that's, we got through this fairly quick. It's only been about a half hour or so, so you have some free time on your hands. Do we have any questions about what I've gone over today? A reminder that at the top of your screen there's that little thought bubble. If you click on that, that's a place where you can enter any chat questions, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions at this point in time. So I will kind of just kill some time. I apologize. The loudest it's been all day in my house here was during this webinar, as they're drilling a hole in the side of my house for the new vent for my furnace. So again, my apologies. I don't see anybody asking any questions, so hopefully that means that I've covered everything thoroughly enough. So let's take a look. We're going to do our next Wednesday webinar. Will be the second Wednesday in May 9th. At 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. So feel free to, you can always sign up for the Wednesday webinar on our help website. I'll also send out some reminder emails so you can get signed up for it at your convenience. Otherwise, we're glad you've been able to join us today. I do see that somebody has, can I do a couple questions? Can we do a tip of the week on fixed fee invoices? Yes, we've done some previous ones on that. We'll probably cover it again. And also on the LawPay client portal. And in fact, last month's tip of the week was about how you just set up LawPay through the client portal. And that's a good reminder that I want to show you all, that if you'd like to, view some past Wednesday webinars, TimeSolv has a YouTube channel, and I'll TimeSolv YouTube, in which you can see all of our Wednesday webinars, and it has what the topics are. So if you go to YouTube, go to type in TimeSolv, and you can see here is our YouTube channel. You can go to our playlists right here. We have a Wednesday webinar playlist, and you can see we have, let me just pause that. We have last March, February's. We don't have January's in here. We had a corruption with the recording, unfortunately. But going back here, so for example, March's webinar, you can see if we show more down here, first topic of last month's webinar was how to enable LawPay payments through the client portal. So if you click on each one of these, you'll see what the topics were. No, I didn't put that in for the topic here on February's. That's my mistake. So here's like a long one that we did obviously back in December. So that's where you can find and look at past ones. We haven't done the fixed fee invoice one in a little while. I do know it was one of our earlier Wednesday webinars, and it would be a good topic to cover again. Specifically, there's different ways you can set up your fixed fee invoices. There's a quick and dirty way. There's ways you can set it up where it's kind of milestone billing based on what you're going to charge each month. So that's a great idea. I mean, since I know we haven't done it in a while, perhaps that'll be the topic to tackle for next month. So it's good questions. Okay, any other questions that you might have at this point in time? If not, I see a few people have dropped off, so I think I'll go ahead and wrap this up here. If you do have some follow-up questions, email us at support@timesolv.com. I will send an email with a recording for this webinar. As soon as it processes, it probably will be either tomorrow or Friday. You should see an email from me with a link to that, and it will be posted here in our Wednesday webinar playlist on YouTube. So with that being said, everyone, hope you have a great rest of the day, and we will see you next month. We'll talk to you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.